Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. A big shout out to Furby House Books in Port Hope for partnering with the Cobourg Public Library. This partnership allows us to bring authors to the screen. We are very pleased to have author Anna Maxymiw here with us today. Anna's award-winning writing has appeared in the Globe and Mail, Hazlitt Magazine, Maclean's, and the Washington Post. Today, we are very excited to take a glimpse into her novel, Minique. Loosely based on the lives of real 17th century figures, Minique is a fierce outsider narrative, a feminist fable, a survival story, and a turbulent romance rolled all into one captivating novel. Our host is once again the very talented Ashley Pimenter. When she's not curled up with a good book, Ashley creates and supports programming to support the kids who are part of the Girl Guides of Canada. She is also the co-chair of the Red Maple Award Steering Committee and writes reviews for the Canadian Children's Book News. Welcome, Anna and Ashley.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us. Oh, this is so exciting, as always. Hello, audience. Nice to be back with you again. This is my favorite time of the week when we get to talk to a fabulous author about a fabulous book. Hi, Anna. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here and that we get to talk about this fantastic book, Minique, today, as you can see behind me. I believe this is your first book, correct?
It is my first novel. Okay. So they are positioning it, it says like debut novel everywhere. I wrote a memoir in 2019 called Dirty Work, and that's it right there. But this is my first foray into fiction.
Fantastic. Now, is this would be a different type of genre for you, because your pieces from the Walrus and the Post that were mentioned, those are explorations in the real world, so to speak, correct?
Yeah, memoir pieces, which I love. I love memoir, and I love writing it. I've never gotten a piece of fiction published anywhere, I don't think. I'm going back through my CV. So this is like a brave new world for me.
Oh, well, isn't that perfect that it's also a brave new world for your fabulous character?
Thank you.
This is my favorite question to ask because I'm very nosy. Okay. How did this story find you?
That was a great question. So I was thinking back, it's hard to remember the timeline, but I did have to go back and look at the actual Word document. I started writing it in October 2017, which was also the advent of Me Too on social media. So that kind of dovetails really nicely. But this story came about through a podcast called Lore, which is about like mythological creatures and cryptids, really outing myself here. And one of the episodes was about the Nain Rouge, which is a little red imp that actually to this day still is celebrated in Detroit. They have a parade to the Nain Rouge every year. I think it was maybe put on hold during COVID. And there were sightings like just a few decades ago in Detroit. So really interesting. Anyway, it's a little kind of impish character that people say when you see it, it brings bad luck. And the story of the male character in this book, Antoine Cadillac and Mère Minique, is that they met at a banquet where she was telling his fortune. And she said, beware the Nain Rouge. He was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then he was out on a walk, apparently saw the Nain Rouge, hit him with a walking stick. And he lost everything. He did, truthfully, got thrown back to France and put in the Bastille. So I heard that on the podcast and I thought, ooh, that's so interesting. But what if they were younger? And, you know, what if, because she's described as they say like elderly woman, but that could maybe be in the 40s. I don't know. What if they were younger? And what if they were really sexually interested in each other? And I thought, okay, this is it. And that was it. That was the sort of the spark.
Oh, that's fabulous. It's such a fascinating story because it really benefits the reader that you started younger, because when you start the book, she's 12. And so like you go into this foray of her not understanding the world in the same way that you don't understand the world. So like you create this instant kindred in Minique with your readers, and it's just fantastic. And so it's really interesting, this idea of you bringing her to a younger age and like sort of twisting the narrative a little bit, which is the glory of historical fiction, is that it really gives you that playground to explore and to put your own twist on things. And one of the things I really love that you did in your book is that you put a feminist twist on historical nonfiction, which we don't often see. And okay, I don't often see. I should put that. I don't want people to at me because they're like, I read it. And actually, please at me so that I can read your books.
Yeah,
actually, please do that. So what sort of response has your book received with this little bit of feminist retelling in it? Well, okay, with a lot of bit of feminist retelling in it.
You know, I do wonder, a lot of the research I did, I'm trying to think of how I could talk about this without spoiling too much, but a lot of the research I did showed me that, you know, the New France we learn about in like grade 4 social studies class is, well, first of all, like fake, because they're like, oh, all the indigenous people were friends with everyone. And you're like, this is the worst retelling. And we don't really learn about what life was like at the time. A lot of the research I did kind of suggested that New France was more feminist, or at least less oppressive to women than I had thought. And even with like Catholicism, which like I went to a Catholic school for 10 years. So I feel a little bit qualified to talk about this. You know, there was instances of like the priest trying to do a sermon and then like people in the back of the church playing dice. So it was a really interesting kind of research process to realize like women, because there are so few women in New France, they kind of had agency of who they picked to marry. And so I feel like it's not perhaps too far off what reality might have been, although really a lot of the written examples we get are from men, and white men. But there is a character in the book, Anne Lamarck, and I don't want to spoil what she does, but she's real. She's a real woman. And the thing that happens in the book that's really happened in real life. And she gets the better of a priest. So I feel like I'm not straying too far from reality. And I feel like people kind of need that. I feel like we just need like a kind of, especially now with like the repealing of Roe versus Wade. We want a woman with agency. And I'm hoping that that's what I provided.
That's what I felt. And oh, it's so good to be like in the know. And I'm like, I know what happens. And I wasn't expecting it to happen. And it was just so good.
I feel so exclusionary being like, well, you know, this thing, but it's like a big plot point in the book. So I don't want to give it away, but she's a real character. And the words she said to this priest, which are just horrifying, are real. So yeah, at least as real as we can tell. And yeah. I will add one more thing that, you know, at the same time period in the States, in Europe, women were getting killed for being witches. And as far as I could tell, there was one person in New France who was killed for being a witch, and it was a man. So I think Canada at the time was like, look, we're just trying to survive, do whatever you want, kind of thing. Yeah.
It's sometimes fun to be like, you know what, not everything was rigid and restricted and the like. And you really painted a beautiful relationship as well with like what actually was happening with the Indigenous people who were there. And I really appreciated that even though it was historical fiction, you modernized some parts of it so that your language was inclusive. And I really appreciated that as a reader, being like, oh, am I going to have to cringe over this part? And I really appreciated that. So like from your other readers who are going to read this and be like, oh, thank goodness it's not that kind of historical fiction.
I'm really glad that you picked up on that, because some readers are like, oh, there's some anachronisms. I'm like, the only anachronisms that I put in, because this was researched to the teeth, was surrounding like how we talk about Indigenous people. It was writing this book, I was like, I can't not write about the Haudenosaunee who were there at the time, because this is their land. And the white people were like, hey, this is ours now. And you know, this is a very distinct, crucial relationship. But also I'm kind of removed from that because it's not my story to tell. So there are interactions with Indigenous people, and there should have probably been more in this book. But for me, it was like, I don't know, that's not my story. That's not my right to tell that. But one thing I did decide was we've had way too many books with racial slurs in them. We don't need that. We know if I've done a good job as a writer and researched everything else and immersed you in it, then using the word Indigenous is not going to pull you out of the story. So that is, yeah.
It actually, the interesting thing for me personally is that it actually endeared me more to the character of Minique, because I was like, oh, she's like me. I felt this like piece where I was like, oh, she gets it. She gets that these relationships are deeper, that there's issues here that she can't even imagine untangling and is only beginning to scratch the surface. And I really appreciated that as a relatable reader who is also non-Indigenous, to be like, yeah, okay, I see where this is going. And I, again, appreciated that just because it's historical fiction, you don't have to use all of those pieces. So for those who are also like a little hesitant about nonfiction, historical fiction, you got a good one in this piece.
Yeah. No horrible words.
No horrible words.
I think maybe some against women, but
they were needed for the righteous rage, I believe. There's so many nuances that you really play with in this book, in addition to the beautiful plot arc that you take with Minique, that I'm not going to ruin any of it because it's so good, except knowing that she starts when she's 12. But you learn that on the first page, so I feel like anyone could know that. One of the things that you really play with deeply in this book is the idea of grief and how people grieve so differently. And it becomes this almost, I don't want to call it a character in the plot, but it really is a beautiful lens in which you write through. And I'm curious, what role did you see grief playing in Minique's life as you were writing?
You know, it's interesting. I guess there's two people I'll quote here, and they're Dexter from the TV show, The Dark, when he talks about the dark passenger, and I guess Winston Churchill, the black dog. And I think both of those refer to different things, depression and, you know, psychopathy. But sometimes our feelings are so big that they're in the room with us. And I feel like grief was a foregone conclusion in New France. Like, people were dying left, right, and center, especially in Montreal, which was a backwater at the time because it was farther down the St. Lawrence, right? So it was not like the bustling metropolis that Quebec and Trois-Rivières were. And it was so curious to me to think, like, what would a life have been like where you deal with death, where you're up close and personal with death, probably every day or almost every day. And I guess I thought of it like that, like a almost another physical character in the room with people.
Which I think is a fascinating thing that, and this is not unique to your historical fiction, but that a really good historical fiction brings emotion into the story. Because now I did not know enough about New France going into this. I feel like I'm like, oh man, if only the history books were this interesting, I probably would have paid more attention in grade 4. Yep. As we all out ourselves. So that's what we learned about Upper and Lower Canada.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting because the way you've woven emotion into the story, and the way that even like that you have just approached it in your answer of like that people would have seen it every day, but that it would have been, they still felt it and they still had these feelings. It really creates such a wonderful depth to this novel as well, of this exploration of this extra character, the dark passenger. I love that, the dark passenger.
Was Dexter's, I don't think that was season 1. That might have been season 2, but I just remember at the time being like, oh, I love this. So yeah, I carry that in my mind all the time.
Oh, it's such a fascinating time period in history. Grief is so relevant right now. With everything that our world is going through, different ways and seeing different illustrations of the processing of grief is so important right now, with what's going on in the States with Roe v. Wade, with like people coming out of COVID and having lost loved ones recently, and just all of these big pictures. So we're so lucky that your book is this little piece of, like, it's interesting because you go to fiction to escape, but you also go to fiction to heal. And I think that this book gives us a perfect combination of the escape and the healing. And I can't speak highly enough. I could not put this book down. And I was a little bit worried because I was like, it's okay, I'll pace myself. And then I'll have lots of
I love that. That's the highest praise in the world to hear that. I know it's funny because after you write a book, a lot of times you're like, I'm sick of this. Like, I'm sick of this thing. I say it's like when you cook a meal and you eat it throughout and then you don't want to eat it on the table. So to hear people enjoying it is, one, reassuring, but two, really lovely.
Yeah. And I think it's such a unique piece of history that hasn't been really deeply explored. And there's a quote on page 72 about Montreal, about the women in New France. And it just like sums it up perfectly about, you're like, oh yes, these are the characters I'm exploring. I'm not going to tell you, you have to find page 72 and find the quote.
Oh, now I'm like, page 72.
Well, the problem is I also marked it up in my not beautiful copy of the book, so I don't want to put it out so everyone can see another bent copy.
Fair enough.
Are you planning on writing? So are you going to grace ourselves with some more moving forward? Do you think you're going to keep exploring fiction?
Oh yeah, I've already got my next idea. That I won't talk about.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's, it's interesting. I went to school for fiction and then like didn't go into it after I left UBC. But it's more terrifying in a way than, no, I shouldn't say that. Nonfiction and fiction are terrifying in different ways, because nonfiction, you have ramifications in your personal life when you talk about people, and I've experienced those, and lawyers have to lawyer the book. But fiction is terrifying because if people don't like the story, that's all you, like that. You made that up. So, it's I find it scarier in a way, but rewarding also.
Well, your readers appreciate your bravery. Okay, this reader appreciates your bravery. I've just decided to speak on behalf of all your readers.
I love it.
It's okay. The audience here, they know me well enough. I've been doing enough of these. They're like, oh yeah, of course, Ashley's going to inject her own personal and talk on all of our behalfs, because that's what we do. But thank you so much, Anna, for coming and talking. Is there anything you'd like to leave your readers with, or those who are now intrigued and want to read this?
I'm trying to think. I think we've really talked about all my selling points for the book, but I mean, who we haven't talked about because is Cadillac. And I just think there's so many of us who, have been in complex kind of relationships, and maybe relationships or situationships or something where we feel like we don't have agency and we can't get back perhaps at the person who hurt us. And all I will say is that if you're looking for catharsis and for female rage, this is probably the book for you.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Beth because I always talk over at the end.
Perfect.
What a great note to leave a conversation on. That's awesome. Okay. Thank you both for joining us today and spending some time. Thank you for our audience for joining us. And for tuning in once again. Minique is available for loan at the Cobourg Public Library. And just a reminder as well that you can purchase a copy at Furby House Books in Port Hope. Take care, everyone, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Bye,
thanks, everyone.